Welcome to the Ultimate Power BI Exam DA-100 Prep course, the course that's tailor-made for your DA-100 preparation. When connecting to data sources, Power BI has always traditionally offered two modes: import and direct query. In import mode, data is imported into the data model, compressed and optimized, and then stored on disk. When the data is queried or refreshed, data gets loaded into memory, enabling very fast performance. Import mode also offers the greatest amount of flexibility to report developers. The full range of M language transformations and DAX functions can be used by report developers, as well as features like Q&A and quick insights. Because of these strengths, import mode is the default mode when you're creating Power BI desktop solutions. When we use the direct query option, data does not get imported from the data source into the data model of your report. When the report creator configures visuals in Power BI desktop, the actual data source is always queried, not an imported copy. This means that the performance of the data source server will have a big impact on the user experience. Direct query is a useful option when reports require very up-to-date information, and when your scheduled refresh isn't really up to scratch in keeping things up to date. It's also a good solution when the dataset is too large to be imported into Power BI. In addition to import and direct query, we now have mixed mode, which enables us to create composite solutions. A composite data model can be viewed as a variant of working in direct query mode. It allows you to start with a direct query project and then add other tables which are not in direct query mode. The first method of morphing a project from direct query to composite is to add a connection to a data source other than the original data source or database. And a second method is simply to add a DAX calculated table. So for example, if you start with a direct query project and you've connected to a database that has no date table, as soon as you add a date table to the data model, you will automatically switch from direct query to composite mode. And the same applies whether you're adding a DAX calculated table or importing a static table. Additionally, Power BI allows you to switch any of your tables from direct query to import mode, and you can do this on a table-by-table basis. By contrast, if you begin a project in import mode, there are no options which enable you to convert either the entire report or individual tables to direct query mode. Your only recourse would be to delete the imported tables and then re-import them using direct query mode. Let's look at some of these features in action. So in the first folder, 01, get data from different data sources, let's now open 04, select a storage mode. And here we have a project which is working in direct query mode. And we can tell this by looking in the bottom right of the screen, where we can see storage mode is set to direct query, and we have the option click to change. And this data model is based on our sales data database. So if you want to convert that to your local version, just go into transform data, data source settings, and then just click on change source and enter the name of your server. So let's look at some of the implications of working in direct query mode. The first is if we're going to transform data, any transformations that we perform have to be converted into native queries. In other words, in the case of SQL Server, they have to be performed using the SQL language. So for example, if I go into the products table And let's say that I want to make sure that the initial letter of each of these products is in uppercase, I would normally right-click on the product range column and choose Transform, capitalize each word. But because Power Query can't convert that operation into SQL, you'll notice that we get an error message, and the only way we can perform this step is if we switch all tables into import mode. However, any transformation which can successfully be converted into SQL will be permissible. So if I right-click on Product and say I want all uppercase, Transform uppercase, then I have no problem. And if I right-click on this step and choose View Native Query, I can then see the SQL statement that will be executed by the server, replacing the normal M language statements. Another difference is if I look on the left-hand side, I normally have three modes: Report, Data, and Model. But of course, because no data has been imported, there is no Data mode. When I go into Model View, the blue line at the top of each of these tables indicates that they're all in DirectQuery mode. And if we edit one of the relationships that we have between tables by right-clicking and choosing Properties, another feature that's used when working in DirectQuery mode is this option, Assume Referential Integrity. This feature is normally grayed out when you're working in import mode. It's only available in DirectQuery mode. When you activate this option, Power BI is able to optimize the queries that it generates and fires off to the database. And it does this by using inner join rather than outer join wherever possible. And the referential integrity that it's referring to is such things as making sure that there are no null values in the key column of the one table, and in the many table that all the values that we have in the key column, the one that's used for the join, also exist in the one table. So those are some of the differences that we have when working with a DirectQuery data model. Let's now look at a composite model. And to switch from DirectQuery to Composite, all we need to do is to introduce a data source that is not in DirectQuery mode. And for this demo, let's do that by creating a new table using DAX. So we can click on Modeling, New Table, and let's just do a bare bones date table. So date table equals calendar auto. And this will just give us a single column date table, which we can then add to the data model. And as soon as we introduce this DAX table, you'll notice two differences. First of all, on the left, we now have data mode. And if I click on the new date table, we can see the data. We've got a single column consisting of an uninterrupted sequence of dates, which is what the calendar auto function gives us. But of course, if I click on any of the other tables, I simply get a message telling me that this table is in DirectQuery mode and therefore there's nothing to see. The other difference is in the bottom right of the screen, where the storage mode has now changed from DirectQuery to mixed. The other method of introducing non-DirectQuery tables is simply to change the mode of one of the tables from DirectQuery into import. So for example, let's highlight our branches table, and to change the storage mode, we scroll down to the bottom of the properties and go into the advanced section, and here you'll see that we have storage mode, and as well as DirectQuery and import, we also have dual mode. So let's change the branches table to import mode, and let's deactivate the option to set the affected tables to dual. So we now have no bar at the top of the table, and you'll also notice that if I click on storage mode again, I don't have the option of going into DirectQuery or Dual. So once a table is in import mode, whether it was imported in the first place or whether you convert it from DirectQuery to import, it's stuck in import mode. So if you want a DirectQuery version thereafter, you really need to get rid of this table and re-import the table in DirectQuery mode. As well as DirectQuery mode, we have Dual mode. And what happens with Dual mode is that Power BI gives you the best of both worlds. It imports the table, but when creating queries, it then keeps its options open as to whether to use the imported version or to fire off a query to the live version in the original data source. So as an example, let's change the staff table to Dual mode. So we scroll down to Advanced and set Storage mode to Dual. And you'll see that now instead of the solid blue line at the top of the table, we now have the dashed blue line. So that's an overview of the different modes that you can work in and the different ways of switching between them. Let's finish this example by saving our changes. And before we close the topic, let's create a new file. And let's now discuss the use of DirectQuery with Power BI datasets. In the last topic in this section, we discussed the creation of a shared dataset, a centralized dataset from which we could build multiple reports. One of the limitations of this shared dataset is its inflexibility. The fact that every time we want to make a change, we have to go back to the original dataset. What Microsoft have now done is to enable us to connect to a shared dataset and go into DirectQuery mode. And of course the objective is not to stay in DirectQuery mode, it's to take advantage of the ability to start a project in DirectQuery mode and then add in additional data sources. So let's begin by connecting to the shared data set that we prepared in the last video. And we can do that by clicking on Power BI Datasets or Get Data Power BI Datasets. And here's our collision data. And we'll talk about certification in a later video. And we simply click on Create to create a connection to that dataset. Now if you look in the bottom right of the screen, you'll see that we've got a live connection to the dataset, but we now have the ability to make changes to this model. At the time of recording, this feature is still in preview. So if that's still the case for you, you'll need to go into File, Options and Settings, Options, and then click on Preview Features. And here you just need to make sure that DirectQuery for PBI datasets and analysis services is activated. And then of course you need to restart Power BI. So once that's in place, every time you connect to a dataset, you now have this option, Make Changes to this model. And when you click, a message appears which tells us that in order to be able to make changes, we need a DirectQuery connection. So to make that happen, we click on Add a Local Data Model. And then if we look in the bottom right of the screen, we'll see that the storage mode has now been changed to DirectQuery. Now of course, if we did nothing else, this will be a fairly pointless exercise because we haven't really made any change. We've still got a solution which is based on a centralized dataset. So of course the benefit of going into DirectQuery mode is that you can now change from DirectQuery into a composite model. So if we switch across to Model View, you'll see that our two tables are now in DirectQuery mode. But of course they're also part of a centralized dataset. So we can't, for example, click on an individual table within that dataset and change its mode. But what we can do is to add in other data sources to this data model, and if necessary create relationships from those data source tables to the tables within our dataset. And that, of course, is a huge benefit. It's a huge step forward in terms of self-service business intelligence. So let's add another data source to the data model, and then we'll look at creating a relationship from that data source table to one of the tables in our shared dataset. So let's go back into our exercises folder, and in 01, get data from different data sources. Let's go into the data subfolder, and here you'll find a txt file, USA population by state. And this, as you can see, is a page on Wikipedia. So let's copy that URL, and then we'll scrape some data from that page. To do that, we choose Get Data and Web, and then we can just paste in the URL. We click OK, and Power BI shows us all the tables that it's found on the page. Let's click on the third of these, which has the name of the state and the population, which is what we're after in this example, and then let's click on Transform Data to do a bit of cleaning up. So let's just rename the query. Population of states will be fine for a name. And then let's just retain the name of the state and the population. So we'll highlight those two columns using the Control key and remove other columns. And then we'll just rename the two columns State, and 2020 population is fine. So now let's close and apply. And the great thing is we can now go into Model View, find our table, and actually create relationships from that table to the tables in our data model. So let's use the state column to create a relationship between the two tables. And once we have that relationship in place, we can use it in our visualizations. So for example, we could create a table, and then we can go into our new table, population of states, and have the state and the population. And then we could, for example, go into our measures and display the number of collisions. So that's the other thing to bear in mind. DirectQuery is now available when we build a data model by connecting to one of our shared Power BI datasets. Passing the DA-100 could be just a ticket for landing your next job in BI or analytics. It helps you stand out from the crowd, and this course is all you'll need to be confident of passing. So sign up for the course now, and you'll sail through your DA-100 exam with no problems at all.